story that I want everyone in this room to understand. It's the most important story this planet has ever seen, or known. And I'm going to tell it in kind of an unusual way. I'm going to tell it backwards. So what you're looking at right now is a photograph of the ending of this story. And the ending of the story is when two large vertebrates meet each other nearly 400 feet deep off South Africa. So as you've just seen in the video, you know who these two vertebrates are, right? The one on the left is me, the one on the right is this coelacanth. Now, I'm about 40 years old, 40-ish, 40-something, a little more than 40. Those are my parents, so I've been around for about 40 years, and the coelacanths live about as long as humans live. They live about 80 years. So we can imagine that the coelacanth had parents, say, 40 years ago as well. Alright, so this is 40 years ago, one generation ago. I'm going to go back a power of 10. So instead of 40 years, I want to go back 400 years. Well, I can trace my ancestry. My mom's in the genealogy, so I actually know this stuff. I can trace my own ancestry, pick my mom's side or my dad's side, whatever. Follow it back generation after generation after generation until you get 400 years and you get this guy. Anybody happen to know who this guy is? His name is Miles Standish. Anybody knows that? He was the first he's not someone to be proud to be descended from, but he was basically on the Mayflower and he was the first leader of the Plymouth colonies when they first came here, so I'm apparently a direct descendant of him. Coelacanth also can trace its ancestry, if it had access to genealogical materials, and it could trace itself back 400 years, and it wasn't on the Mayflower, but some ancestor of it was swimming off South Africa 400 years ago. Alright. So now let's keep going backwards. We're doing the same thing, except we're going to do it now another power of 10. So now we're going to go back generation after generation after generation on my side, and you end up with some guy living in Mesopotamia, most likely. Don't know if he looked like that. That's what Wikipedia said people who live in Mesopotamia look like. So somebody back around that time. And if you go back 4,000 years on the coelacanth side, you find a coelacanth probably living somewhere off of South Africa. Let's go another power of 10. So these are powers of 10. I don't know if you're going to remember that powers of 10 video with the going backwards in space. But that's what I'm trying to capture here. So here's another power of 10. So let's go back 40,000 years ago. My family tree. What were we doing? Well, we were colonizing Europe, my ancestors were. And we were creating stone tools and doing all kinds of wonderful, interesting things like that. Coelacanths were kind of just another power of 10. Now we're going back 400,000 years. 400,000 years, my ancestors, our ancestors, everybody in this room's ancestors, were living in Africa. It's about the time they're starting to figure out how to control fire. It's a big deal in our history. And this is not only our ancestor, but it's, well, hang on a second. Coelacanth was a coelacanth, not a mistake. But back on our side, so I'm Homo sapiens, right? This guy had a different species name back then. It's called Homo heidelbergensis. He wasn't just our ancestor, although he was Homo sapiens, he was also the Neanderthals' ancestor. So this guy predates the split between Neanderthals and humans, modern humans. Alright, so we're going back in time. Let's go now 4 million years. Another power of 10. So 4 million years back in time. This is the famous Australopithecus. Boy, you think fish names are hard. Australopithecus. Thank you. Apparatus. Lucy. The famous Lucy, thought to be sort of the dawn of humans. This was when humans first began on this planet. And she's the ancestor actually of a number of different species of humans, that some of whom lived contemporaneously with each other in different parts of Africa. And 4 million years ago, can you believe it? A coelacanth was a coelacanth. Now, I'm sure you're starting to wonder, how do I know what's going on the coelacanth side? I'll get to that in a minute. So now let's do another power of 10. 40 million years ago. I think, based on what I've read, my ancestor looked a little something like that. Now, I don't know exactly what it looked like, but it's supposedly 40 million years ago, the lineage led to humans was this sort of shrew-like thing. It wasn't just our ancestors, it was the ancestors of all lemurs, all monkeys, and all the great apes. So now you're starting to see big changes in time. Anybody want to guess? So, if you look at, my side of the tree and say, how much do I look like that thing? Well, not a lot, I guess. Maybe with coelacanth, can't even tell us apart, I don't know. But surely you're looking at the right side and you say, wait a minute, that's the same picture you keep showing over and over, isn't there's no way you can know that the coelacanth looked like that 40 million years ago. Well, actually, we have an amazingly good idea we could. And the reason we know that is because there are actually two species of coelacanth. One of them is the one that lives off of Africa that we went and dived with and visited with. The other one lives in Indonesia. It's called Latinaria menatoensis. And they've recently done a whole genome analysis of these two different species, which are almost indistinguishable. I put the same picture up there for the same reason. It took quite a while, it took DNA studies to confirm that it was truly a distinct species. So from our eyes, the coelacanths in Indonesia look almost exactly like the coelacanths in South Africa. But the DNA evidence shows that they split, those two species that are still alive today, split about 30 million years ago. So if both the descendants of that split 30 million years ago look almost identical, you can be pretty darn sure that their shared ancestor that long ago looked just like they both look today. So this is a very conserved species. It hardly changes over time. It's one of the things that makes the coelacanth so interesting. Not just that it's that old, but it's that stable. It hasn't changed all this time. But we're not done yet. So I'm going to go one more power of 10 here. Now we're looking at 400 million years ago, we finally find the common ancestor that gave rise to both me and the coelacanth. So it was a 400 million year journey before that coelacanth and I met each other again at the ending of our story when I started talking off South Africa, which I find pretty amazing. The most amazing thing is we're not done yet. We've got another power of 10 to go. Oh, by the way, this was also the ancestor to all vertebrates. And including the entire, all dinosaurs, which kind of fit in there to give you a sense of time. It kind of came and went just in this period of time. So let's go one more power of 10. And that's what takes us down to the dawn of life. About 4 billion years ago is roughly when life began on this earth. And as far as any science can tell you, as far as we know, with the possible exception of viruses and maybe a few other things, everything is from the same common ancestor. Every organism alive today, from bacteria to our fish we keep in our aquariums, to our corals, to us, coelacanths, everyone can trace its own genealogy, one generation after another, 4 billion years, all the way back. And I find that actually kind of astonishing, because what these lines, these white lines represent, is that they're actually pedigrees. These are unbroken chains of reproduction events. That is, absolutely unbroken, a 4 billion year old chain, not a single missing link. If one link was missing in anywhere in that tree, no one in this room would be here. Our entire species wouldn't be here, right? So this is astonishing to me, that absolutely unbroken chain of connectedness between every living thing, essentially everything on the planet. So I'm going to give you a little bit more sense of this power of 10. Now, it's hard for us humans to get our minds around the real meaning of what power of 10 means. So let's go back. So if we say 4 billion years ago, the dawn of life was January 1st, right? It was midnight on January 1st at the beginning of the year. The common ancestor between me and the coelacanth showed up around Thanksgiving time. So the entire year, we're still in that first half of the year. We're still in the part of the year of all life on Earth before even this guy was around. So most of the Earth's history of life precedes this guy, right? So the vast majority of life on Earth, 90% of it, in fact, lived before this guy. So let's go to this one here. Remember this guy, my 400 million or 40 million year old ancestor? He was around December 27th of our year of the life on Earth. Lucy, first human, December 31st, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This guy, playing with fire, 11:08 p.m. This one with the tools, 5 minutes before midnight. This guy in Mesopotamia, 30 seconds before midnight. Miles Standish, 3 seconds before midnight. So that's to kind of give you a concept of the spans of time. We can get our head around the concept of a year. The Mayflower came to this country 3 seconds before midnight in the year of the history of life on Earth. It kind of gives you a sense. The human species was only here since 4 o'clock in the afternoon on New Year's Eve. Every moment before then was an Earth without humans. So it kind of puts a little bit more perspective how important we are, how important biodiversity as a broader concept is. When you think about what latecomers we are to the scene. I mean, it's hard to conceptualize, but it's really, really, I think, important. So the way I try to explain it to people, and this is my new sort of sermon that I try to give whenever I can, which is why I'm doing it now, is why biodiversity matters and why we humans should care about biodiversity. So you might recognize this. This is a certain place in the galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. There's a particular star. It's got a few rocky things floating around it. So if you can imagine an extraterrestrial intelligence coming to our solar system, which planet do you think they're going to be most interested in checking out? I mean, maybe the cool one with the rings, right? That's sort of neat. Or the really big one with the red spot. No, the one that they're going to find most interesting is this one. And it's not just because of water. Liquid water, I mean, everyone makes a big deal of all liquid water on Earth. And yes, it's obviously very important for life. But in the universe, there's lots and lots and lots of water. Now, granted, most of it's frozen, but the only thing you need to make liquid water is this very common water and heat, just the right amount of heat. So water is not all that unusual. What makes Earth unusual is biodiversity. That's what separates this planet from all the others. I mean, there may be life on other planets or other moons of planets, but there's certainly not the degree of biodiversity we have on this planet. Biodiversity is an exceptional component of Earth. It's a very precious component of Earth. We don't even know if it's anywhere else in the galaxy. I mean, intuitively, there has to be life elsewhere in the galaxy. But as far as we know, this is pretty darn unusual and pretty darn unique to this planet. So the way I like to explain this to people is like, well, why does it matter? I mean, we get to put biodiversity in our aquariums or in zoos or, it looks pretty on the landscape. And so I say, no, biodiversity is far more valuable than that. So I say, imagine that every species on Earth was like a book, all right? The genomic information stored inside life, what separates life from non-living chemistry is information. Right? What makes life different from any run-of-the-mill chemistry is how information is propagated through time. So if you imagine all species on this planet as being books, each of those books has been edited and re-edited and written and rewritten over the course of 4 billion years. That's a 4 billion-year-old library, right? 10 to 30 million species is what we estimate are on the planet. That's 10 to 30 million unique books. Each one of them has stories to tell. And it's not just any stories, these are special stories. First of all the stories they have to tell are non-fiction, right? They actually happen. All this genomic information, all this information in the genome actually happened. But more significantly, for our purposes, for the purposes of humanity and the future of humanity, is these are stories of survival, right? These are the ones that managed to navigate 4 billion years of adversity, 6 major extinctions, the 6th of which is happening right now. These organisms were able to persevere across this time. Something allowed them to do that. One example I give to people is, imagine trying to build a robot that accumulates its own resources, builds itself over time, fixes itself when it breaks, powers itself for 70 years or more, and then manages along the way to create more of its own kind. Right? And that's what living organisms are. We are. We're these incredibly intricate machines that can do incredibly powerful things. We have just barely begun to understand the power of the information that this global biodiversity genome has to offer. Now, you've probably heard on TV shows about things like, cures to diseases. Yeah, there are probably the cures to every disease is somewhere in that genome. You just have to learn how to read it. And this is a point I'm trying to make, is that global biodiversity is like the Library of Congress. And we, humanity, right now, at this stage of technology and understanding and education and science, right now we're about the equivalent of a group of kindergartners running around this Library of Congress. I mean, literally, we barely understand the magnitude of the information that surrounds us. Now, like kindergartners, a few of us are starting to learn how to read, see, spot, run, right? We're at that level. That's about the level we're at right now. All this news you hear about, all these great tools and medicines coming out of genomics, is really, we're still at the see, spot, run level. There's way, way, way more we don't know about the genome than we do know about the genome. In fact, it's more than just the genome. There's epigenetic factors. There's all this other information buried in not just our own species, but every species on the planet. And we haven't even begun to tap the magnitude of that information. I saw Craig Venter give a talk. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was instrumental in the completion of the human genome sequence. He did a project where he sequenced the Sargasso Sea, this toad plankton nets, and grinded it up in a blender and saw what was out there. And he made an interesting point, which is that prior to them doing that, there were 12 known, I think it was photoreceptors, biological photoreceptors, 12 different ones that they could tell how biology was able to convert sunlight energy, receive that sunlight energy, and convert it into chemical energy. Well, during their survey, lining up the gaseous sea, they found 800 more, which means that there is information out there that we have no knowledge is even there. It's the unknown unknowns of Donald Rumsfeld here. We just don't know how much information is out there. And what's scary to me is that if you imagine, let's pick an average 20 million species total global biodiversity, and you go back to the year 1750 when we started, 1758 for animals, when we started cataloging life on Earth, that's how far we've gone, right? So this is building the card catalog to the global biodiversity. We've managed to get, maybe if we're optimistic, about 10% of the total card catalog, right? So we all know the painting on the left is species that are truly endangered, not like corals, but truly endangered. Species on the right are species that are gone or extinct. So we have this extinction crisis, and as I mentioned, we're in the midst of the 6th great extinction right now. We have no idea how far it's going. So the evidence is showing that we have species going extinct at rates faster than have been the previous major extinctions. So it's a little bit scary. We don't know what global biodiversity is going to be doing over the next few years. So what we need to figure out is what happens there. One thing that's not going to make that trend change is the Endangered Species Act, right? I mean, that's a nice political tool, and sometimes you can use it for good purposes, but as Julian told us, sometimes it can be abused. And so I don't think that's the kind of mentality. We need a fundamental change. And this is where I get, when I have to, in Hawaii, I have to deal with sort of the snorkel bob kind of issues. And I have to explain to even some of my peers, my scientists, who just sort of assume that the aquarium hobby is a threat to biodiversity. I say it's the exact opposite. The people in this room care more about the organisms that they maintain than the vast majority of scientists and biologists and the vast majority of people who call themselves conservationists. And the thing that's going to change the trajectory of that curve is not going to be the Endangered Species Act. It's going to be passion. It's going to be people. It's going to be motivated people. And as far as I can tell, the aquarium industry is among the most motivated and compassionate about protecting, preserving, and prolonging biodiversity of any group I ever interact with. So, absolutely. I'm on the side, and I try to help when I can. I don't always have the time to do everything, but I just want you to know where I stand on that issue. And I wouldn't be concerned about biodiversity if I didn't start out my life as an aquarist. So that's sort of a big deal. Now, I was told you wanted to wrap up by 10. I've got a very short video, if I may, 2 or 3 minutes, and it's not quite 10 yet. So I'm going to show you guys one more video. And it's a short video, and the reason I want to show it, this was filmed by and put together by a friend of mine, Howard Hall. Some of you may know him. He's a very famous underwater filmmaker. And he and I were together in Cocos Island a couple years ago, 2011.